Hi, fellow G's. This is Edgar Zuniga back again from NAGn Studios East. Today, I am joined by a very special guest, somebody that we've had on before, whether you know it or not. And this is Matt Baker, who covers St. Louis City SC for the Flyover Footy podcast. Now, why did I say that? Because earlier this season, Bryant and I actually had Matt Baker on. We had a wonderful conversation with him. We talked all things St. Louis City, not just the team, but just the history, the contributions that wonderful city has made to our beautiful sport. And then we found out afterwards that somebody did not hit record, and this amazing podcast was lost to the ether. But today we have Matt back. The occasion this time is that LA Galaxy have signed a former St. Louis City player in John Nelson. On Thursday, LA Galaxy signed free agent left back John Nelson, who played for St. Louis City SC in 2023. Nelson was born in Medina, Ohio on July 11th, 1998, sorry, making him 25 years old. Before joining St. Louis, Nelson was drafted by FC Dallas in 2019 and spent some time bouncing between FCD and USL One side North Texas SC before joining FC Cincinnati in 2022. In 2023, he played in 18 matches across all competitions, providing 1 assist in MLS play, and now he's with the LA Galaxy. So, Matt, what was your initial reaction to hearing that Nelson signed with LA Galaxy?
Well, I figured that there was a need for a two-way player. As a fullback, Johnny Nelson has gifts that are on both sides of the ball. He was an attacking-minded left back for us. He worked well in our high press system. He was a guy that he had some issues on the defensive side in 1v1 open space, but overall he excelled with a guy like Joao Klaus up top to deliver service to. He was pushing high. He was an exciting player to watch. And so I knew from watching him last season, the way that St. Louis's season developed, and almost a victim of circumstance to an extent, but I knew that he wasn't coming back. We knew for a period of time that he wasn't going to be coming back. It was one of the easy things you could bank on going into the offseason. And so to see him be picked up so quickly, it's exciting because this is a new territory for St. Louis fans to be into, where we've just lost a few of our first inaugural season players and they're getting picked up. So it speaks volumes, I think, to the scouting of St. Louis to pick up players that we are now seeing transition to other teams. But there seems to be a clear need for the Galaxy for that depth in a two-way fullback, and John Nelson fits that to a T.
So you mentioned that you knew going towards the end of the season that Nelson would not return with St. Louis City. Why do you think St. Louis did not re-sign him for 2024?
Yeah, I felt bad for John Nelson at the end of the season, because if you look at how St. Louis's season developed, he started off when we first picked him up from the expansion draft. We presumably had a starting left back already signed in Selmir Pedro, Bosnian, who was the first signing for St. Louis City. It was a big deal in St. Louis with a high Bosnian population. But in preseason and training camp last year, you found pretty quickly that John Nelson usurped that left back spot, and he took it, and he started the first third of the season as our left back, and it was consistent. He was a good performer. He helped St. Louis get off to that 5-0 start, the historic nature, all that stuff. But as the season began to progress, the first ebb and flow that St. Louis went into with a couple losses there after the 5 wins, and Klaus himself going down with an injury against Colorado back in April, that was the flashpoint, I think, for John Nelson. When Klaus went down, St. Louis couldn't find a way to win. We lost another 2 games after that. And it wasn't until Nelson was flipped out of the roster for converted left back Kyle Hebert. Kyle Hebert is a center back by trade. He had never played the position before, but in a way to try and find a spark for St. Louis, they moved him to left back, and they changed a few other roster maneuvers there. And Nelson really never found his way back into the starting 11. He was more of a rotational player. He helped with depth when we had fixture congestion, midweek matches here and there. And then Klaus was out for so long, and Nelson really never found his way in. So it was almost like St. Louis needed to try and find a way to win without Klaus, and Nelson was a piece of that, removing him from the lineup, putting Hebert over there, having a more defensive-minded left side. And Nelson, whether it's he never found a new opportunity, he never pushed himself up above Hebert in the depth chart, he never found his way in. And then as the season progressed, you saw Anthony Marcanic a left back from the Colorado Rapids organization, be picked up by St. Louis. And he was very similar to John Nelson in how they play, their style, pushes high a lot. He's very attacking minded, good at crosses. But when Marcanic was signed, you could kind of see the writing on the wall that if you're picking up a left back in the same model of John Nelson, then there doesn't seem to be room for him. He seems to have lost his spot. And we never really found out what it was that caused that to be lost, because the assumption was he was going to at least finish the season as a change of pace left back. Hebert and Nelson play very different styles. And so once Marcanic was signed, Nelson's last appearance for St. Louis was during Leagues Cup play. He didn't feature on a game day roster at all after that. And so from that point on, it was kind of clear that with Marcanic in, Nelson didn't have a spot.
On the surface, it almost sounds like losing Klaus kind of exposed Nelson. Would you say is something to that effect?
Yeah, without Klaus, with that, we struggled in our striker position in general without Klaus, because at the time it was Nico Gioacchini as that single striker. Sam Adeniran was still out on loan, Klaus hurt, so you had one single striker. And Nico Gioacchini is not a striker in the same vein as Klaus. He doesn't, he's not the holding line player. He's not the big body that you can just send the ball up to. He's more of a creative playmaker, second striker underneath type of a player. And without that body for Nelson to deliver service to and to kind of work around, he didn't really seem like he found a groove with Gioacchini. And so to that extent, you could look at the numbers and say, well, the Galaxy are picking up a player who didn't feature for St. Louis. He was the third string left back by the end of the year. But I look to how Nelson performed at the beginning of the year to see what's possible. And so whether Nelson ends up as a starting left back or as a rotational player, someone who plays in one of the other cup competitions, I think he's going to provide a lot of value. And if it wasn't for those circumstances, I think St. Louis would have had more use for him as the season progressed.
Okay. So moving on, how would you describe Nelson's play to somebody who's never seen him before, and what would you say is his greatest asset?
I think his greatest asset is his vision high. Nelson is he's not going to be somebody who stays deep and plays defense the entire time. He needs to be given some freedom to move up. He needs to be delivering service to the center. He needs to be allowed to be more creative. If you're giving Nelson an opportunity to be creative in the offensive area, that's where he excels. And he's good at staying wide. He's good with overlapping runs. And so there's a lot to like about what he can bring in the attack. It's the defense, I think, that is his one area of improvement. Like I said, 1v1s in space, he wasn't the greatest at, and kind of being able to hold a back line when you had center backs that were so spread out. St. Louis's style inherently had fullbacks that moved high up the field. And so there was a lot relying on our center backs in a system that wouldn't be as high pressing so consistently. I think there's a little bit more freedom that would afford Johnny Nelson in his ability to, I guess, defend in space without being so reliant on those 1v1s. I really like what I saw in what he was able to do in the attacking end. I can't speak highly enough for how the start that St. Louis got off to, scoring buckets of goals over a period of 5 games or so, wouldn't have been possible without Nelson. Our offense, in a lot of ways, flowed through him because we didn't have a midfield that progressed the ball. It was not send and pray type of thing, but at the same time, he was very consistent in his ability to progressively pass the ball, his vision to find some of those wingers high up. And he played off of our left mid. He played off Jared Stroud and Indiana Vassilev very well wide for St. Louis. And he often ended up on the far end line when he was trying to move the ball up. So he definitely takes chances. He's a guy who you can count on to be fearless in those ways. He's not going to be timid, staying at the half line. He's a guy you can look to and you can expect to be in the attacking third a majority of the game.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to hear this because when news came down about Galaxy signing him, there was a very mixed reaction with some people asking, first of all, who is this guy? And second, some people were like, oh no, if St. Louis let him go, this is not a good thing. Why are we picking him up? But, hearing you say all this offers, your particular insight and gives us more of a positive spin on things. So we're really looking forward to seeing how he's going to fit in with this team, which, to be honest, it's still a huge work in progress. There's so many pieces that are still missing. So we really have no idea what to expect in 2024 here in Galaxy Land. Um, as far as Nelson joining the club is concerned, off the field, LA Galaxy is always known for having a lot of players that become club favorites with the fans. And I'm just curious to know what kind of personality does Nelson have, and what should Galaxy fans expect from him off the field and fan interaction?
Yeah, he has some interesting backstory that comes with him. So one of the you'll if you watch his career, you see the progression from the FC Dallas organization on up to FC Cincinnati, and then you see him come to St. Louis. But the thing you might not see unless you dig into it or unless he talks about it in interviews are his history of back issues. Because when he was with FC Dallas, he definitely had a lot of back issues. His back was really tightening up on him. I think he spoke about the fact that he was having difficulty walking at periods of time. So he had surgery where he had some of his spinal columns, I think it was, that were fused. And so some of those vertebrae that were fused. And so once he had the surgery on his spine, he was kind of like a new player. And that's what St. Louis received, was that new John Nelson. And that's why I think he was so much different than what we expected. And as he was doing that, you saw a confidence in him. So he's a guy who I've noticed is on social media. He does see the comments, and he will play to that. So he wants to not necessarily be the center of attention, I would say, if I had to describe it, but I would say he thrives on that visibility. He thrives on success, and he craves it, and he sees the comments. He sees how the discussions are going, and he's passionate about who he plays for. I saw the way he played FC Cincinnati the year before us, in trying to scout him, but also with us in particular. He plays with a fiery passion. He's a guy who, because of his fearlessness and relentlessness in the attack, I think he'll endear himself in his play style. He's not afraid to go into those 1v1 situations, so he's not going to hang back and kind of let the ball come to him. I think, at least in St. Louis, that's the kind of player that we really gravitated towards, like the John Nelsons, the Jared Stroud type of a player, in the non playmaking perspective, just like how he conducts himself on the field. So that was really good to see. And I think if I had to guess, I would say once you see him on the field in a Galaxy kit, you're going to enjoy what you see.
It's funny you mentioned the social media aspect, because shortly after it was announced that he was joining the club, he actually hit Twitter and he was mentioning something to Galaxy fans, and I was like, oh, here we go. And Galaxy fans were responding to him. So you start, like you said, they're starting to build that familiarity with him, and hopefully that transitions into a really positive interaction with the fans throughout the season. Now, let's change gears a bit, because the last time that we spoke to you, in the episode that never was, we were discussing, this first season for St. Louis City SC, and all the expectations that come with it, the excitement of having, not just a new team, but a new identity for the city. Um, and then the playoffs come, right? And it's one thing to lose in the playoffs, but losing to your biggest rival in the Derby queue,
Yeah.
it really stings. Trust me, we know. But overall, were you satisfied with the inaugural 2023 season?
Absolutely. As a whole, I think, and now being removed from it for a month or two, as a whole, you can't be anything but thrilled with how the season played out. There are the moments and the periods of time of the historical runs, the 17 wins, all of that stuff that the club likes to tout. But at the end of the day, you look back and you finished first in your conference in the regular season as an expansion side, and you are positioning yourself the way the roster has been constructed, the way the signings have started to turn out in the offseason. You're positioning yourself to use that as a stepping stone, as opposed to a massive setback or a sophomore slump like you saw from Austin. And I think that's the extra exciting piece, is that in a bubble, 2023 was amazing, and it had just about everything that you could want. Not just in the way that it finished, but if you look through the whole season, St. Louis City didn't lose more than 2 games in a row at any point in the regular season. And that speaks to, I think, the resiliency and the ability to find new ways to win when you needed to, because they lost both of their designated players for periods of time due to injury. And to be able to withstand that, to withstand the League's Cup break, because St. Louis didn't handle certain follow-up games very well after League's Cup, and the way that they learned how to handle an MLS season was very impressive from the get-go, because you had guys like Bradley Carnell, first-year head coach. A lot of the players who were key contributors for St. Louis, brand new to MLS. And the way that they were able to withstand that kind of a season is a testament, and just builds the entire narrative around the year. So I can't speak highly enough about 2023 for St. Louis, but I'm definitely excited for the way the 2024 is building too.
Sorry about that. Before we talk about what you expect for following season, I remember we were discussing the fact that one of the biggest reasons for your team's success is the fact that the team actually played together a year before joining MLS, correct?
Yeah, in 2022, when City 2 was playing in Next Pro, the year before St. Louis joined MLS, they signed a core of their international players prior to that transfer window. Or so when the transfer window opened in the summer of 2022, they brought in Klaus, Leuven, Berkey, Tomas Ostrak, Selmer Pedro, and they were able to get those guys on the field for a handful of games with City 2 from August, September, October of 2022. And so not only the on the field aspect, you're getting them in, you're having them learn the system, learn each other, but you're able to take care of all of that off the field white noise, the cultural aspects, the finding a place to live, all those things that really get into a player's mind. And it allowed them to focus on the field a lot more going into the season. And I juxtapose what we were able to do for the majority of our players to a guy like Jabulu Blom, who was our central defensive midfielder, our number 6, we brought in from South Africa after in the winter transfer window, January 2023, right before the season started. He came into camp late, and it took a while for him to get going. He had injuries. He had just a cultural adaptation struggling. And so to see that of what could have happened if we didn't have that opportunity magnified for the rest of our squad, you have to point to that ability to bring those players in so early as a reason why we were so successful.
That's actually pretty unique, actually, and it's I think it's a master stroke. Like what a fantastic idea to bring in the players, not just to get used, like you said, to the system, but also get acclimated to the city, to a new culture, for especially for the players coming from overseas. You mentioned Blom joining the club from South Africa. I mean, he went from like summer in South Africa to winter in St. Louis, which is pretty rough. Um, so, man, what a fantastic idea. I wonder if other future clubs like San Diego will do something similar where they have their players come in and just get used to being in San Diego, which, to be honest, San Diego's kind of chill. It's a
Yeah,
beautiful, beautiful city.
I would have expected that. I see what St. Louis did, and I'm not the only one to think of that as what the model should be. If you're going to expand to new markets, then have the team have that prep time, because the opposite is what happened to Cincinnati, where they had only 9 months of prep time to build their squad. There's two polar opposites, and you saw how they started versus how we started. But I don't know, San Diego doesn't seem like they're in too big of a hurry. Like you mentioned, different mindset, just kind of
Yeah.
that SoCal beach, that they just don't seem like they're in a hurry to build a team prior to, I think 2025 is when they start. But it
Yeah,
seemed like a model to me that
2025.
everybody
Yeah.
should use for what St. Louis had.
It's funny you mentioned the beach because a lot of people think when they think of California and think of the beach, they think of LA. But if you've never been to San Diego's like the city's like practically like right next to the beach. It's like a whole beach. But anyway, going back to St. Louis, after this amazing season in 2023, what do you expect for 2024? Like, just we're still in the middle of winter. I mean, actually, winter is just starting, right? But
Yeah.
what do you expect for 2024? Come January, come February, when all the players are starting to come back together.
Yeah, so it's tough to say, because I mentioned that I want to build off of what we had for the first place finish. And the only really way you could do that besides finishing first again is to start winning playoff games. That's the next obvious progression for St. Louis, because I tried to skip over it as quick as possible, the fact that we lost our 2 playoff matches against Sporting Kansas City, but it happened, and you have to live with that. And when you have this kind of season, that's the natural progression. But you also have CONCACAF Champions Cup thrown in the mix as well. And it sounds like MLS teams are going to be in the US Open Cup still. And then we have Leagues Cup again. So all of these additional competitions, on top of the fact that the league now knows St. Louis, they're not taking anybody by surprise. There's a reason also that St. Louis had a little more difficulty as the season progressed. And it wasn't just the nature of the league, injuries. It was the fact that their system now had tape, and clubs playing them the second time could see, and they could game plan better for them. So St. Louis has that going against them as well. but I feel like they're bringing in some really nice pieces to complement who they had last year. We didn't really lose any key contributors from last year. The players that were picked up recently from St. Louis, besides John Nelson, were John Bell. John Bell is the other player that we picked up in the expansion draft that we let go, and he didn't feature for us throughout the entire season. We traded out Jared Stroud and Lucas Bartlett. Again, Stroud was a huge contributor. Bartlett was a center back for 2 months for St. Louis, but Stroud was probably the player that we lost this season that had the biggest impact. But when you lose him and you trade him for a guy like Chris Durkin from DC United, who's a central defensive midfielder, he's kind of he can either be a complement to Jabula Blom, or he can be, a 1A, 1B to him in a pivot. That gives depth at a position St. Louis desperately needed help in. There were 2 positions coming into this offseason that everybody, I think, who knows the club was looking for reinforcements in, and that's defensive midfield and fullback. And I would have targeted left back, like we're talking about this left back position, as an area of need for St. Louis. What they chose to do is bring in a Norwegian youth national team player. He's 24 years old, Thomas Totland. And this was a signing just a couple of days ago, maybe even yesterday. My days get away from me now. But the idea of bringing in that caliber of player on a long-term contract, shoring up a position of need on top of the Chris Durkin trade with DC United, those are the 2 positions that we wanted to see movement in, and we already have our answers prior to Christmas. So we have, I think, 1 roster slot left, 2 players on loan. So there's some movement that can be made, but if I was a betting man, I wouldn't look to that as much, because Lutz Pfannenstiel, our sporting director, loves to keep freedom and flexibility to his roster. He likes the ability to bring players up, to sign homegrown deals throughout the year. He just likes to have his options available. And so the roster that he's put together now, not really losing any key contributors minus Jared Stroud from last year, bringing in 2 players that are filling the exact positions of need for us. There's a lot to love about how this roster is being constructed and the depth that we're taking into those additional competitions for next year.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us all this wonderful insight. I'll say it one more time. Matt, I really wish we would have had that episode that we had, earlier this season.
It was a
But
good one.
it was a wonderful one, right? It was almost like a documentary, learning so much about, the history of the sport in St. Louis. But we will have other opportunities. Obviously, the schedule was announced for the upcoming season. Um, just before we leave, are there any games that you're looking at the calendar and you're like, yes, gotta circle that one?
I mean, the obvious is Inter Miami, right? Luis Suarez was just announced a little bit ago before we're recording this. And, that we're going to Miami on June 1st. That's an exciting one. We've got 3 more matches against Sporting Kansas City. We're keeping the Chicago Fire on our schedule, which I like the fact that we've got them. We've got FC Cincinnati again, which are keeping some of those like cross conference regional rivalries in place, which I think is smart. If you're stuck in the middle of St. Louis, St. Louis is the furthest east Western Conference team. And so it just makes sense to play some of those closer teams like Nashville, Chicago, Columbus, Cincinnati a little more often than you otherwise would. And I know on the West Coast, no shade, but it's probably all flyover country. That's why my podcast is called Flyover Footy. But to us, it gives us the opportunity to have what you guys have with teams like San Jose and LAFC and soon San Diego. So I look to those types of games on our schedule whenever it's released.
Actually, if I had my wish, I wish we would play DC United more often, to be honest. That's like an old rival that we got a chance to play for the first time in many years last year. And it was momentous time. I mean, we got crushed in that game, but a lot of old Galaxy fans remember the old rivalry between Galaxy and DC United, which is interesting because they're from different conferences, but there was that clash for superiority at the beginning of MLS, and you know Galaxy and DC are 2 of the most successful clubs in the league, and we always look forward to that, but we never really get it. So whatever you guys have with your teams, was you said Kansas City, Cincinnati, Chicago, embrace that and make it a part of your club culture, and always celebrate those opportunities you get to play those clubs, because you never know, the league is always changing. And I mean, we saw what happened with the US Open Cup, and now there's that battle. So yeah.
Enjoy while we can.
Yeah. So before we go, one last question. Sorry. Tell people about the barbecue, because I brought it up and they're one of our NAG podcasts, and some people were like, "Oh, that's amazing! It's what a wonderful name!" We had one guy who was like, "Oh, that's the stupidest idea ever." And then I gave him a stone cold stunner, and I was like, know your role, boy. But can you tell us what the barbecue is, and are we going to see some smoke masters for this upcoming season?
Yeah. So I mean, when you have a new rivalry, a new derby, right? Everybody's always trying to name it, and that's been I can't count the number of types of names that came out. There was the barbecue, there was the Missouri River Derby, the Big Muddy Derby, for obviously the body of water that connects us. I-70, you could go with the roads. But the soccer capital derby, that kind of thing that went back and forth. But I think the barbecue is the one that it's got obviously the play on the word derby and barbecue, because St. Louis, Kansas City, two big barbecue cities. We constantly jab back and forth about who has the best barbecue. We tout these top 10 lists that always come out. So that's kind of just, it's one of the more creative, I think, in all of the league. You guys have El Trafico and the California Classico that I think are great names, and they borrow from kind of like historical soccer, football type derbies, but this just seems very Midwestern to me, and something that we kind of like have as our own. So it's kind of gotten a little traction. It hasn't gotten enough to where the league is touting it as the barbecue yet, but there's still time, and I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the whole flyover thing, and I lived in Kansas for a while. I love Kansas. I love the Midwest. I think it's a beautiful place. A lot of people don't get the opportunity to visit it. There's some beautiful things to see out there. The weather is kind of nuts, but just it's a beautiful country that we have here, and there's a lot of wonderful places to visit and fly over, spaces. And I enjoyed my time down in Kansas. And you're right, the barbecue down there is something different. My wife's from North Carolina, so I've had North Carolina barbecue, and I've been able to have some Kansas City barbecue and St. Louis barbecue, and to me it's just amazing. These different flavors, right? But
Oh
as
yeah.
far as which was better, I don't know. I'm gonna go a little bit on the Kansas side here because I live
If
there.
you ever come out to a St. Louis City game at City Park, there are multiple barbecue restaurants in the stadium. The Beast, I think, is one of the best ones. They've got this pork steak sandwich it's massive. I mean, that thing can satisfy two people for one sandwich. You have to try it. I mean, it's phenomenal.
I'll definitely have to take you up on that. So if you're ever in LA, by the way, just hit me up. If you can't get a press pass, I'm gonna get you into the stadium for free, and all the code ones on me.
Let's do it.
All right, so everybody, thank you so much for joining us. As you guys know, I'm Edgar from News Across the Galaxy. You guys know where to find me, Edgar Nags on Twitter, Instagram, and you can find us as News Across the Galaxy on YouTube. If anybody's interested in learning more about St. Louis City, keeping up with him, with Matt, and also learning not just about St. Louis City, but about the league itself, because I always tell people, I encourage people to listen to other podcasts, because you'll learn so much more about the league and the beautiful footballing culture that we're building in this country. So, Matt, where can people find you on all socials?
All the socials at Matt Baker STL, and then any Apple Podcast, Spotify, just search Flyover Footy or at Flyover Footy.
All right, everyone, thank you so much. As always, keep on nagging. Boom. And Matt, is there anything you want to say on your way out?
Nah, thanks for having me. It's always a good time to be talking soccer, and I'm just happy to do that so close to Christmas. So happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you, everybody, and Merry Christmas.